Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's TLL seminar speaker series. My name is Lourdes Aleman, and I'm one of the associate directors for teaching and learning within the TLL. I have the absolute pleasure of introducing Professor Elizabeth Canning today, who will be speaking about growth mindset in the context of higher ed. Just a little bit of background about today's seminar. Research has shown that students with a growth mindset, the belief that intelligence and human traits are malleable, can approach difficult academic challenges more productively. During the first couple of decades of research on mindsets, the emphasis was really in understanding the differences in students who approached challenges with a growth versus a fixed mindset, in understanding the origins of these mindsets, and also in designing growth mindset interventions, which first took place in K through 12 and more recently in higher ed. But really, during the past decade or so, researchers have started to take a look at the effect of environmental mindsets on students' own performance and their own behavior as a consequence, shifting the emphasis from the student deficit model to the environmental causes that really play an important role in how students approach their own work and academic challenges. So Professor Canning's work is one of those examples. She's the first author on a seminal science paper that you might have seen. It was published in 2019. That was really the first paper to look at the effects of faculty mindsets on students' performance in higher ed. Dr. Elizabeth Canning received her PhD in social psychology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and is now an assistant professor in the psychology department at Washington State University. Her research centers on student motivation. So actually what you're seeing today is just a slice of her work, an important slice, but nonetheless a slice of her work, and investigates the subtle, both interpersonal and environmental messages that are communicated to our students and within organizations that help perpetuate bias and inequity in our societies. So without further ado, I'm extremely excited to have Elizabeth Canning here with us today. I am a practitioner of the growth mindset. I teach about it, and I can't be more thrilled to have her come speak about this really important topic. So thank you, Elizabeth, and take it away.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm happy to be speaking with you all today. So let's just jump right in. I want to first talk about sort of some baseline numbers. This is a graph in the natural sciences, and this is a problem that has existed for many decades. There's been lots and lots of research focused on attracting and retaining diverse individuals in STEM fields. And what we know is that racial minorities are disproportionately leaving these fields compared to their white and Asian counterparts. So this is a graph of the natural sciences, and it compares freshmen majoring intentions. Those are the blue bars here, with their actual degrees 4 years later. Those are the black bars here. So for white and Asian students, freshman intentions generally match the percentage of degrees. So people who want to go into these fields end up getting a degree in those fields. However, there are much larger gaps between intentions and actual degrees 4 years later for Black freshmen and Hispanic students. We see similar kinds of findings for women in male-dominated fields. We also see similar findings for first-generation college students, so students who are the first in their family to go to college to receive a bachelor's degree. And I really like starting these talks with this type of graph because I think it highlights that something is happening in these courses. So people are wanting to go into these fields. They have intentions to go into these fields. But something's happening in these courses to make them opt out. And I think there's a real opportunity here to retain these individuals. So why do these gaps exist? Well, it's very complex, as I'm sure you all can imagine. We know that they're multiply determined. There's economic, structural factors at play here. But what I'm going to focus on is how these gaps can be exacerbated by social psychological factors. So this is the extent to which stigmatized students may feel less engaged, less interested, less motivated for a number of reasons. If they're worrying about belonging in these contexts, if they're worrying about confirming negative stereotypes about their group. And as instructors, we have a real opportunity here in our courses to counteract these maladaptive or negative social psychological factors by being meaning makers, okay, in our courses. So let me give you an example of what I mean by being a meaning maker. So imagine you are a student in an introductory course, an introductory biology course, and you just got back your first exam score and you didn't do as well as you wanted. Maybe it was your first exam in college. Maybe you haven't taken a lot of biology classes before you enter into this college level class. And you ask yourself, what does this grade mean? Does it mean that I can't do this? Maybe biology isn't for me, or maybe biology isn't for people like me. Okay, you might know stereotypes about your group. Maybe you're a Black woman, maybe you're a first generation college student. The grade you get on that exam carries a lot of weight. It carries a lot of meaning. Or you could interpret that negative grade or this grade that you didn't want in a different way. You could interpret that to mean, I didn't use the right study strategies. Maybe I should ask for help next time. Maybe I should join a study group. Maybe I should do a number of different strategies. It's not that I don't have the ability to do well. It's that I didn't take the right steps to get to where I wanted to go. Now, as instructors, we can provide this meaning. We can redirect students from this interpretation to this interpretation down here. Now, how do we do this? I'm going to give you the punchline right away of my talk, and it's fairly simple. You just have to say it. So you can take 30 seconds in your class to provide that meaning. So be very explicit about that meaning. Say, if you didn't get the grade you wanted, it doesn't mean you can't do this. It doesn't mean that you're not smart. It doesn't mean that you don't have the ability. Learning's a process. It takes time. And sometimes you have to try out different study strategies and then give what those strategies might be. I believe that everybody has the ability to do well in this course. And we can figure out how to do this together. It doesn't take that much time, but now you are providing that meaning for how the students are interpreting that negative grade or that negative event that might have happened. Now, the research that I'm going to talk about today is based in mindset theory. So I'm going to go a little bit into what this means and the different types of mindsets. So according to Carol Dweck's mindset theory, people hold different mindsets or beliefs about human traits. And I'm going to focus today on intelligence or ability. Okay. So people who endorse more of a fixed mindset believe that abilities are fixed and can't be changed. You either have what it takes to be successful or you don't. On the other hand, people who endorse more of a growth mindset believe that abilities are malleable and can improve with effort, learning, good strategies. Now, as it was mentioned at the very beginning in the introduction, we know a lot about students' mindsets, and they predict a number of things. Decades of research have investigated people's personal mindset beliefs and found that when people believe that intelligence is fixed, they often experience decreased engagement, persistence, decreased performance. And these are particularly when they're encountering challenging situations, okay? Like getting a poor exam grade, for instance. So we know a lot about what growth mindset or what fixed mindset predicts. We also know now what it's not. And so I want to clear up a little bit first before we get into some of the other research, some misconceptions about mindset research. So growth mindset is not first dichotomous. So it's not that you either have a growth mindset or you have a fixed mindset and that's it. It actually exists on a continuum. So you can endorse more of a growth mindset or more of a fixed mindset, but in general, most people are somewhere in the middle. And it might depend on the context. It might depend on what it is that you're evaluating in that moment. So for instance, I might have a growth mindset about my biology skills, but I might have a fixed mindset about my basketball skills, right? I don't think I have the ability to be a basketball star, okay? So it's domain specific and it's continuous. Another misconception about growth mindset is that it's only about effort. So you just have to persist and work hard and put in the effort And that's what a growth mindset is. And that is not actually what a growth mindset is. It encompasses more than that. So it is a little bit about effort, but it's also about seeking help when you need it, when you come up to that challenging situation. It's knowing and recognizing that you might need to switch strategies in order to grow your abilities in that domain. So if you're just putting in effort over and over and over again, and you're expecting a different result, that's going to be really frustrating for some students. So it really encompasses more than just that. Growth mindset is also not just about positivity. So it's not just having this rosy outlook on life that everything is going to turn out well and be fantastic. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So endorsing a growth mindset means that mistakes are going to happen, and that's okay, but they're welcome. And it's also that challenges are welcome. So putting yourself in situations where you might be a little bit vulnerable and showing that you haven't reached the level of ability that you might want. So you might not get the grade you want. You might not show other people that you have that ability in that moment. So it's being vulnerable. It's accepting mistakes, accepting challenges. It's also not a goal setting strategy. So it's not just that people need to make goals and then make steps to reach those goals. It's a little bit higher order than that. So it encompasses goals, but it's a belief system. So your belief system will guide which types of goals you adopt, but it's more than that. It's in how you communicate to people, how you react to those mistakes, how you react to those challenges. So it is related to goal setting and the types of goals, but it's a little bit higher order than that. It's a belief system. So going back to sort of what research has focused on for the past, 20, 30 years, most of the research has focused on students exclusively. So how students' beliefs about their ability impact their own outcomes. So how well they do, how long they persist, what kinds of classes they take. And this work is really important. However, when you only focus on the student, it puts the burden on the student. So while they did poor on that exam because they didn't have the right mindset, and it kind of lets the other people in that environment, the other messages in that environment off the hook. Okay. So as a social psychologist, I know that, people's beliefs don't exist in a vacuum. They are influenced by the context, by the environment. And so what my research does is it flips this around and focuses on the meaning maker in that setting. Who is giving these students these messages, and how do their beliefs and their belief system matter for students? So when faculty believe something, when they have a belief system, students are pretty perceptive. They're going to pick up on that. And that's what my research is showing. And this can have dramatic consequences for not only everybody in that room, but particularly for stigmatized groups who contend with negative stereotypes about their group. So let's talk a little bit about faculty or instructors and their mindset behaviors. So faculty communicate their mindset beliefs in a number of ways. It might be what they say in class, how they design their syllabus, how they talk to struggling students in their office hours. We know that college instructors who endorse a fixed mindset do a number of behaviors. So they place less emphasis on learning and development and more emphasis on perfect performance. They're more likely to encourage struggling students to drop difficult courses. So saying things like, it's all right, not everybody's meant to have a career in this domain, have a career in math. Maybe you should find something else that fits your ability. So they're comforting students for poor performance. It's not that they're mean people or negative people. They can have warm personalities. They can be comforting. But the message is that ability is something that doesn't change. And so if you're not doing well in this class, maybe you should find another class that's a better fit for your ability. Now, this type of messaging is particularly harmful for students who deal with negative stereotypes about their group. So let's talk about that next. So when your professor has a fixed mindset, it can be demotivating for everybody in that context. Why do you want to put in effort or seek out different strategies when your professor doesn't think that you can improve? That can be really demotivating. And this might be especially harmful for stigmatized groups because it can trigger what we call in social psychology, stereotype threat. So stereotype threat is a well-documented phenomena that occurs when one fears confirming those negative stereotypes. And we know that this leads to lower performance and lower motivation for these individuals. So what does it mean for students when the professor has this fixed mindset and thinks that some people have innate talent and some people don't? Well, the assumption that students are going to make in that setting is based on the cultural stereotypes. So based on the cultural stereotypes, the inference students are going to make is that the majority group has that ability and stigmatized groups don't. These classes are going to elicit a culture of stereotype threat. Okay. However, when the professor endorses a growth mindset, the inference is that as long as people put in effort, seek help, use different strategies, go to office hours, use those resources, all groups have the potential to improve their abilities. So students would not experience stereotype threat in these courses because the growth mindset message says that it doesn't matter what the stereotype is, anyone, regardless of group membership, has potential to do well or can improve their skills. So today I'm going to cover 3 studies that I've done in the past couple years. It's all very, very new and recent. The first study I'm going to talk about is looking at underrepresented racial minorities as the stigmatized groups. This is a university-wide study that looked at faculty's self-reported mindset beliefs and students' grades. Then in study 2, I'm going to look at women in a male-dominated field, looking at how this affects women in those scenarios. This study is a laboratory experiment manipulating faculty mindsets. So here we're looking more at a causal nature between these things. And then the last study is looking at first-generation college students as the stigmatized group. And here, this is a randomized intervention in a biology course to see if we can intervene and give students these messages to improve their experiences. So the first study, the objective of this study is to identify this link between faculty mindsets and student performance. So what we did is we sent out a survey to all STEM faculty at one university. A total of 150 STEM faculty responded, which much to our surprise, actually, because people don't like to answer surveys. But 150 of them told us what they believe about intelligence. So we kept it very, very short because we wanted them to respond. We only asked 2 items. Here's an example item. So they're answering whether they agree with this statement. To be honest, students have a certain amount of intelligence and they can't really do much to change it. We also asked about their demographics and their teaching experience. So here's the distribution of the scores that we got from these faculty. For the most part, it's pretty normally distributed. So, and in fact, it kind of spikes a little bit on the more fixed side here. Now, I find this really fascinating because when you think about educators and we think about people whose primary job it is to help students learn, and yet there are a lot of faculty who believe that ability or intelligence is something that just can't be changed. Okay. We sampled faculty from all 13 STEM departments on this campus. We had the most responses from biology. It's a fairly large department on this campus, but we had a sizable number from math, statistics, physics, chemistry, computer science as well. The gender and race breakdown of the faculty in this study mirrors faculty demographics in the STEM departments at this university, as well as national numbers in the United States. So after we surveyed the STEM faculty, we obtained course grades from every single student that these faculty members taught over 2 years preceding our survey, which included over 600 STEM courses and over 15,000 undergraduate students. Here's the breakdown of the students. This is consistent with this particular university. And if you're interested in the data analysis, so we ran multi-level models with partially crossed random effects, multi-level because students were nested within courses, which were nested within faculty. We added crossed random effects because students could take courses from more than one professor in the sample, and so we needed to model that in the data. We also included a bunch of covariates that we know affect or predict student achievement. like class size, that's a big predictor of student achievement, course level, student demographics, students' prior performance, so their SAT, ACT scores. We also threw in faculty demographics and faculty experiences, so whether they were tenured, how long they had been teaching. All right, so we first looked at their grades in these STEM courses, and we found a main effect of faculty mindset on students' grades. So here we have it's a +1 standard deviation on this continuous scale of mindset. So the more growth-minded instructors are over here, and the more fixed-minded instructors are over here. And then on the y-axis here, we have students' course grades. So overall, consistent with what we assumed, according to growth mindset theory, students are earning higher grades in courses taught by faculty with more of a growth mindset compared to a fixed mindset. But what's really interesting is that we found this interaction with student race. So consistent with this idea of stereotype threat, we also found that underrepresented minority students performed more poorly in STEM courses when faculty members endorsed a more of a fixed mindset compared to a growth mindset. So let's look at this graph. Here in the blue bars, we have the majority group in this particular setting. So these are white and Asian students at this university. The red bars here represent racial minorities in this, underrepresented racial minorities in this context. So in this context, that is Black, Hispanic, and Native American students. Now, again, you have the fixed-minded professors over here and the growth-minded professors over here. And what you can see on this side is the racial achievement gap. So minority students are performing more poorly overall in STEM courses compared to white and Asian students. That's not new. We've known this for many, many years. But what's interesting here, though, is that this achievement gap doubles or is twice as large when faculty endorse a fixed mindset compared to when they endorse a growth mindset. So given this large sample of students here, the URM bars, the underrepresented racial minority bars here, represent grades from over 1,600 minority students. And this has huge implications when you think about how many STEM courses you need to take in order to become a doctor or an engineer. Okay, depending on how many fixed mindset professors you're exposed to, these differences can really add up over time in the course of higher education. So the next question we asked was, well, that's all fine and great, but do students actually experience these classes differently? Can students tell if their professor has a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? So in this data set, because it was such a large sample, we didn't want to survey 15,000 students. So we looked at what was available to us, and that was course evaluations. So here we're looking at average course evaluations for all of the 600 courses that were taught by these faculty in our sample. Here we were not able to get course evaluations at the student level, although we tried very, very hard. They would not give it to us due to confidentiality, so we were looking at averages. So we weren't able to look at this by student race, is what I'm trying to say here. But we did find evidence nonetheless that students are picking up on these differences. So at this university, there are 5 standard questions that are asked of every course on these evaluations. So we looked at those questions. The first one here, students were asked, how much does your instructor motivate you to do your best work? And what we found is that students who had a growth-minded professor felt more motivated by them. The next question was, how much did the instructor emphasize learning and development? And STEM instructors with a fixed mindset were less likely to emphasize learning and development than STEM instructors with a growth mindset. The next question was, how likely would you be to recommend this course with this particular instructor? And students were less likely to recommend STEM instructors with a fixed mindset. The last question here asks about the time. So compared to other courses you've taken, how much time did this course require? And here we found no differences in the amount of time the course required, suggesting that courses taught by instructors with a fixed mindset were not more difficult or more challenging or more time consuming than courses taught by faculty with a growth mindset. So to summarize this study, we found that faculty mindset beliefs predicted students' experiences in these STEM courses. We see that in their evaluations of the faculty. And faculty mindset beliefs may contribute to these racial achievement gaps that we've seen for many years in STEM fields. But of course, this relationship is correlational. So now it's time to move to the next study where we're looking at this causal link. So the objective of this study is to establish causality. Do faculty mindset beliefs cause stigmatized students to underperform? So in this study, we can look more at mechanism and see how this process unfolds. So in this study, what we did, this is a laboratory study, we had over 200 undergraduates come into our psychology lab for a study that we told them was on perceptions of a Calculus 2 course at the university. And we didn't have enough power to look at racial minorities as the stigmatized group because remember the last study had very large samples. So here we're relying on participants in like a subject pool. And so we chose to base this study on a calculus course in particular because women are negatively stereotyped in math. And so the idea is to look at a similar process for women in a context in which there are negative stereotypes about their group. So we randomly assigned participants to read either a growth mindset syllabus that was infused with a bunch of growth mindset language, or read a fixed mindset syllabus, which was infused with a bunch of fixed mindset language. And we based these manipulations, I'll go through them in just a minute. We based these manipulations on focus groups that we conducted where we asked students to tell us, what do faculty do that communicates a fixed mindset? What do they do and say that communicates a growth mindset? And we chose the most representative of those examples for this manipulation. We also pulled language from a repository of a bunch of syllabi from instructors at the university, but also at other universities. So the examples I'm going to give may seem extreme. However, they are based on actual syllabi with actual language from real instructors. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so to just compare what these syllabi looked like, both syllabi had the same policy, but the explanation of that policy differed in whether it was proposed in a growth mindset way or fixed mindset way. So I'm just pulling a couple examples. We manipulated things all throughout the syllabus, but for the sake of time, I'm just pulling a couple. So the first was about attendance. So both syllabi had this policy of not taking attendance, but they differed in how the policy was explained. In the fixed mindset syllabus, the professor recommended attendance only from the weaker students. And they didn't want to penalize students with strong abilities by requiring them to attend something that they might already know. So here the message is about communicating that some students are going to do well, some students aren't, categorizing students based off of this idea of innate ability. However, in the growth mindset course, the professor recommended attendance from everybody. So regardless of how well you've done, previous performance, I still want you to come because everybody can learn new things, everybody can improve themselves, everybody can challenge themselves. We also manipulated messages around getting resources or getting help. So both courses let students know about these help sessions offered by the department, but again, the meaning behind these resources differed. So the fixed mindset syllabus recommends that struggling students make use of them, but smart students probably are not going to need them. Again, here the message is about categorizing students based off of innate ability, smart, gifted. This communicates that ability is something that you can't change. Whereas in the growth mindset syllabus, all students are encouraged to make use of these resources because everybody can learn and improve and challenge themselves. Okay. Now, I always want to stop here because I always get questions about, well, nobody would ever say this in a syllabus in these fixed mindset syllabi. However, most of the people that I talk to in these talks are people who want to improve their teaching and want to do these things. And so you are the exception here. There are lots of people who say all kinds of things in their syllabi and in their classes. And so again, these were based off of students' real experiences and also actual syllabi that we pulled from a repository. So we also wanted to know sort of what's going on with students. We wanted to see the mechanism, how this process unfolds. And so we asked students to tell us whether they thought the professor endorsed gender stereotypes. We also asked them about, if you were going to be a student in this class, how much would you feel like you belong or fit in? And then we gave them a placement test for this hypothetical course, and we had them do some GRE math problems as a measure of math performance. So let's look at their perceptions of whether the professor endorsed gender stereotypes. We have the fixed mindset condition on the left here, the growth mindset condition on the right. And what we found is a significant main effective condition. So this means that on average, students thought the fixed professor would endorse more gender stereotypes compared to the growth mindset professor. So this was true for men, which is what I'm showing you right here in these bars. It was also true for women. However, we found a significant interaction with student gender. So this means that when the professor signaled a fixed mindset, women thought the professor would endorse more gender stereotypes compared to men. That's not super surprising because women are very attuned to this in these contexts. Okay. However, what's really interesting here is we find no gender differences at all in the growth mindset condition. So this suggests that both men and women perceive the fixed mindset professor to stereotype women. So it's not just women that are picking up on this, men are also picking up on this. But women especially thought this would be the case because it's personally relevant to them in this context. Next, we look at their anticipated belonging in this course. We found a similar pattern here. So here I'm flipping the scale. So belonging is a good thing. We want this to be high. We want these numbers to be as high as possible. Again, we found a main effective condition. All students on average felt less belonging in the course when the professor endorsed this fixed mindset. This was true for men, what I'm showing you here. It was also true for women, what I'm now showing you. And we observed this significant interaction. So when the professor signaled a fixed mindset, women felt less belonging compared to men. But in the growth mindset condition, there was not a significant gender difference between these bars here. Now I'm showing you the results for math, the performance on the math test. Here we did not find a main effective condition. So here men are performing equally well in the fixed mindset condition and in the growth mindset condition. It didn't matter what the fixed or what the mindset was of the professor, they're performing the same regardless of that framing. However, this was not the case at all for women. So when the professor signaled a fixed mindset, men significantly outperformed women on this placement test. So they're answering about 4 more problems out of a total of 30, although most people didn't get 30, the average was, in the middle there. So they're answering about 4 more problems correctly compared to women. However, when you look at the growth mindset condition, the gender gap in performance was significantly smaller. So it was reduced by 60% in this condition here. So this suggests that faculty mindsets affect women's performance, but it doesn't affect men's performance. This is consistent with the idea of stereotype threat. So let's look at what this process looks like unfolding over time. So putting it all together, we hypothesized that professor mindset, if they had a fixed mindset, would lead to people perceiving them to endorse gender stereotypes. That would lead to lower belonging in the course, which would lead to lower performance. However, we anticipated that this effect would be different for women. So we looked at this in terms of moderated serial mediation, and this indirect effect was significant for women, but this indirect effect was not significant for men. So what does this mean? This means that the professor with a fixed mindset was threatening for women. It made them think that they'd be stereotyped by their professor, and this led them to feel or anticipate lower belonging in those courses. And when you feel like you don't belong, it can lead to worse performance. Now, men also found the fixed mindset professor threatening, but it didn't affect their performance because men are not negatively stereotyped in math. They are not on the negative end of that stereotype. So in summarizing this study, we've established this causal link. We randomly assign them to these conditions so we can make a causal claim here. We're establishing a causal link between faculty mindset and student outcomes. Communicating a fixed mindset is threatening for everybody. Nobody likes these professors. They think they're going to use gender stereotypes. Nobody feels like they're going to belong in these courses. However, only when you're part of a group that is negatively stereotyped does this affect your performance. In this study, faculty communicating a fixed mindset undermined women's performance, but not men's performance. So what's next? I want to tell you about some work that's still in progress that I've been doing here at WSU. Is there a way that we can intervene? Is there a way that we can change this messaging to see a causal effect on student outcomes? So that's what we tried next. In this study was done in spring 2020. That will become relevant in just a minute. But I want to point out this was done in an introductory biology course. It was a very large course that had over 500 students in it. This is the breakdown of the course demographics. It's consistent with this particular university. In this course, the largest achievement gap is with first-generation college students. So we are particularly interested in their reaction to this intervention. So what did we do? We did a syllabus manipulation. So everybody in the course was randomly assigned to receive a different syllabus. We had a control group, so they got the regular syllabus that was used in this class for many years. And then the other half of the class got a growth mindset syllabus where we infused this growth mindset language throughout the syllabus. Now, we kind of thought students might not read the syllabus just based on personal experience of being an instructor. And so we did a follow-up just to reinforce this message. We sent an email just selecting a few different messages from that syllabus to make sure that they at least were exposed to it in some way. So what did the growth mindset syllabus look like? Here's just one excerpt from a note about office hours. So it gives their office hours, and then it explicitly says the mindset belief here. So I believe that every student can improve their skills, learn from their mistakes, and be successful in this course. So attending office hours is one of those ways to improve your skills. I recommend everybody do it. Let's find a time. The control syllabus basically just had all that information, except we removed all of the growth mindset language. We also measured at week 15, so this is at the very end of the semester, different psychological effects here. So we measured how much they feel like an imposter in this class. So some of my previous research has shown that first-generation students in particular feel like imposters in college. And when you feel like an imposter, it can lead to a number of negative outcomes like higher dropouts, lower performance. It can lead to less help seeking. And so we were particularly interested in this measure for this population because we're focusing on first-gen students. Now, I mentioned this was done in spring 2020, which means if you're not blocking out that semester from your memories, this was a semester where we abruptly changed online mid-semester. So the first half of the semester was as normal, and the last half of the semester was in chaos, essentially. So what this means for this study is the manipulation happened in normal times and the outcome measures happened in chaotic times. So we ended up throwing a couple items in last minute because we were like, let's just see if we can get anything out of this study and see if we can't just lose all this data. So we added effort costs. And this is the idea that you have a lot going on and you can't put in the effort that you know is required for this course. We thought that might be especially relevant in this particular context. We also asked intrinsic motivation. So this is the science motivation questionnaire, a standard measure of intrinsic motivation. So first, we're looking at imposter feelings. The red bars are the first generation college students. The blue bars are the continuing generation college students. The control condition here is consistent with what we found in previous research. So first generation students feel more like an imposter than continuing generation students. But what's really interesting here, though, is when the course was framed in this growth mindset way from the instructor, this difference in imposter feelings between continuing generation students and first generation students goes away completely, okay, even despite the chaotic nature of this semester. So let's look at effort cost. Effort cost again is knowing that things are crazy, knowing that things are going on, and that you can't put forth the effort that you know is required for this class. So consistent with what we know in the normal times, first generation students feel more effort cost than continuing generation students. But this goes away when the course was framed as a growth mindset perspective. Now, again, this manipulation happened 14 weeks earlier, 13 weeks earlier, before things went a little haywire. We're also interested in motivation. So here in the control condition, we didn't see any differences in motivation. It's very hard to measure and change motivation in a pandemic, I will say, based on personal experience. In the growth mindset condition, we found first generation students in particular were experiencing higher intrinsic motivation than continuing generation students. It's a pretty small effect, but we were excited about this nonetheless because it's very difficult to change this online. So to summarize this study, faculty mindset beliefs may be this potential lever to create more identity safe classrooms and narrow achievement gaps in STEM courses. And we can do that by communicating a growth mindset. So I want to give you some ideas about how you might do that in your class. So the first idea is pretty simple. It's to be very explicit about what your beliefs are, to say it out loud, to put it on your syllabus, to put it in your emails, to be very explicit about your endorsement of a growth mindset. You can also structure it in your syllabus. So planning your syllabus, create opportunities for your students to show that growth, to show revision, to show improvement. So structure your class in such a way to where it is reinforcing that message that you care about that improvement. You can also infuse that in the way that you assess students. So reward improvement, reward challenge seeking in your course design. Explain the purpose, provide the meaning of seeking help and using resources in this growth mindset way. Other ways you can communicate a growth mindset would be in performance feedback. So especially around that first exam, which we know students are really anxious about, and they're looking for meaning and how to interpret those, that feedback. How you respond to mistakes, how you respond to struggling students, that is indicative of the mindset that you have in those classes. And then of course, offer feedback and strategies. So don't just assume that students know what those strategies are. So my final message, I know we're almost out of time here, is the takeaway that instructors have the opportunity to create meaning in their classes. Students are searching for that. They want somebody to tell them what that meaning should be. And you can do this by being really intentional about communicating growth mindset messages. So being explicit, put it in your syllabus, put it in emails, talk about it with students when they're coming to you with struggling or challenges. I want to acknowledge my collaborators on this work, Dr. Katie Meeks at UT Austin, Dr. Doreen Green at Indiana, Elise Ozier, Dr. Mary Murphy at Indiana, and Dr. Bill Davis at WSU. And I'm happy to open it up for questions now.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was amazing. We have so many questions. Let's see if we can get through most of them. So I'm going to start reading the questions based on how they were upvoted.
Okay.
So the question that has the most upvotes is, how do you deal with students who don't believe you when you tell them that they can learn and grow? One student told me they found this affirmation condescending. I don't know if you've experienced that before.
I don't know if I've experienced any condescension. I think the way to do it is to give examples, to say, you know, in my experience, I've seen this many number of students make improvements from exam 1 to exam 2. If you give concrete examples, I think it can be less like sort of a fluffy statement of like, yeah, everybody can improve, sort of this positivity, you know, kind of way of delivering that message. If you give concrete examples of, yeah, I had a student one semester who was in the same position as you, and they did these things and made these improvements and ended up, you know, doing whatever afterwards. So I think making it concrete can help and maybe mitigate that, you know, unbelievability that it could actually occur, and also maybe cut down on that condescension.
Thank you. How well do self-reported instructor growth mindsets reflect how that mindset actually is represented in assignment and course design? Great question. Yes.
That is a really great question. We are actually looking at this explicitly. So we were a little nervous. So when you look at K through 12 instructor teachers, they're a little bit more in tune to the mindset research. And so we see a lot of demand characteristics when you ask them about their mindset beliefs. So most people are on the growth minded side. But if you remember the distribution of faculty mindset, it's pretty normally distributed. And it's not the case they don't necessarily know about growth mindset, but it could be due to education. I don't know. So we're not really seeing the demand characteristics that we see in the K through 12 when we're looking at it there. In terms of what it predicts in terms of behavior. So it does predict behavior. It predicts more subtle behavior in terms of like how you would communicate to students. So what we've done is we've given instructors scenarios. So if your student does this, or we kind of give them like a little vignette and we say, how would you respond to this student? They're responding differently. It's a little bit more complicated when you look at course policies, because sometimes that's not dictated by the instructor. Sometimes that's dictated by the department, or, if there's multiple sections and you have to sort of keep it consistent. So that's a little bit trickier. In terms of what students perceive, that's also an interesting question. Are students perceiving the behaviors that the instructors are doing? And that's where we see the disconnect. So we see the disconnect in that students are not perceiving the growth-minded behaviors that the instructors think that they're doing. And so that is where we need to work to communicate in a way to where it's recognized by the students.
Thank you. Do you take into account different grading styles by different instructors? It seems there might be correlations between faculty mindset and grading style.
Yes. So in terms of the main effect that we found in the first study, right, that students are earning higher grades in the growth mindset courses than in the fixed mindset courses. That could be that those are easier courses, that there's, the averages are different than the fixed mindset courses. We have looked at that in a number of ways. So we've looked at it in terms of difficulty in terms of like average course grades, the distribution of course grades. We've looked at it in terms of opportunities for, how do I say this? Opportunities for getting grades. So is it a midterm and a final, or is it, there's multiple opportunities in there? And what we're finding is that the way that we define a course as being difficult is not the way that students define a course as being difficult. Those are kind of two separate things. And so a student can actually find a growth mindset course to be much more difficult than a fixed mindset course, because there's a lot more work in those courses. They're required to revise things. They're required to submit multiple assignments. It's not just a midterm and a final. It requires a little bit more effort, a little bit more work. And so students find those courses to be much more difficult than the fixed mindset courses. But it's a tricky thing. It kind of depends on how you define course difficulty, how you're measuring it, and whose perspective you care about most. In terms of like objective grades, we didn't find any differences in terms of like the distributions are the same across them. We didn't find any difference in terms of students perceiving them to be taking more time. And so we've kind of triangulated around that question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The next question has been addressed by the end of your talk. What are some strategies for structuring a course so that it supports a growth mindset? So maybe we have more time, we can talk about perhaps more details, but I think you did address this question in your talk. Do you take into account different grading styles? Oh, that one has already been done. Was there any correlation between faculty age, teaching experience, and mindset?
Yes, I love this question. So people want to know who are the ones with the fixed mindset? Who should we be targeting? And we can't. It's going to be disappointing because we don't know. We know what it's not, but we don't know who it is. So we looked at demographics predicting mindset beliefs. We looked at age. We looked at teaching experience. All of the things that we measured. None of that predicts mindset beliefs. So there is a stereotype that it is the white professors, it is the older professors, it is the male professors that are the problem people. However, that's not what we're finding. We're finding that all different kinds of instructors are endorsing a fixed mindset. Doesn't matter what your gender is, doesn't matter what your race ethnicity is, doesn't matter how long you've been a teacher. So this is not going to resolve itself over time. A lot of people will think that, well, once those people retire, we're going to have this new perspective, this new ideology, and that's not the case. So we do have to make interventions. We do have to intervene in order for this to change.
Thank you. For using course evaluation data, how do you account for other biases in how students rate different instructors, like gender, minority, status, etc.?
Yeah, so course evaluations are a horrible measure. I will acknowledge that at the very beginning. We used what we could in that study. So we wanted to look at this at the highest level, so 15,000 students, 600 courses, and that was what was available to us, other than going out and surveying all 15,000 students. So there wasn't really any way to do that. We did control for, instructor gender, and we controlled for all the demographics that we had about instructors. However, we know that there are very systematic differences in course evaluations due to gender, race, also age. So we weren't really able to take that into account other than controlling for those demographics. However, in addition to all the other studies that we've done, we kind of have gotten around that in terms of students' perceptions of their instructor and measuring those things in a different way other than course evaluations.
Someone asked if you'd be willing to share growth mindset oriented syllabus.
Yes, yes, we can do that. So the growth mindset syllabus in terms of the like the manipulations that we did. Yes, yeah, I'm happy to share that. I will point out that, when we did this in the classroom, right, we compared it to a control group because it would be unethical to compare it to a fixed mindset.
Yes, of course. I like that you suggested a statement about grades. Is there data on the efficacy of instructors making statements like that? I guess your syllabus research perhaps is one statement.
Yeah, so it was a question about like fixed-minded statements.
I think, yes, I think the very beginning when you were presenting how to talk about, a poor performance in an exam, and you had a suggested language for how to address that in the classroom.
Yes, so we actually did a follow-up study to the syllabus study that we did in the biology classroom. We did it actually last semester, so last fall, where we didn't do anything in the syllabus anymore. We just manipulated the exam feedback. So everybody in the class was randomly assigned to either get sort of this email that was like, hey, exam grades are posted, here's how you calculate your grade. The other half of the class got a different email that said, hey, your exam grades are posted, here's how you should interpret it. So we put in similar language to what I put on that slide, where if you didn't get the grade you wanted, you don't have to be smart. You don't have to, it's not that you don't have innate ability, it's that you need to do different strategies. And then it listed a bunch of strategies. And we're finding very similar findings for first generation students. So they're reporting lower imposter feelings, they're reporting more motivation. So we had that study that I didn't talk about today, but is still in progress.
Yeah, wonderful. Do preconceptions of professors affect growth mindsets? I've had good professors that my peers hated because a few vocal students perpetuate negative opinions every year.
So like their reputation of kind of going into the class expecting the professor to be a certain way. Yeah, so we know that expectations matter a lot. In social psychology, there have been several studies actually that look at people's perceptions going in. So we have, the primacy effect, where you're told that this is going to be a warm professor or a cold professor, and then you go into that class and then you perceive that they're warm or cold, even though their behavior is the same. So there's lots of research on that showing that, yes, that matters a lot. Reputation matters a lot. When you tell people to expect something, then they actually perceive it in that way. In terms of how that relates to this research, that's going to be a problem across conditions. So for instance, the intervention study that I showed, study 3, we would assume that would be through random assignment. Those students are going to be in both the control condition and in the growth mindset condition, because we randomize at the student level. So they're all in the same course. So, just given that study, we would assume that it's not going to matter so much. that maybe these manipulations can counteract that. But we'd have to look into that a little bit more, I think, to be definitive.
This is a really interesting question. Have you or someone explored textbooks that you suspect of fixed mindset diffusion? Some older but still circulating teacher faculty training materials, maybe? That's interesting.
Yeah, so we haven't done that. I know there's been a lot of work with K through 12 looking at false growth mindset. So looking at instructors giving the message, giving the growth mindset message, but then really focusing on effort and not focusing on the other pieces of it. And we know that can be actually detrimental to many students, especially struggling students. So when a student is struggling and they get the message of, well, you just need to put in more effort, you need to grow, you need to, you're not going to improve unless you put in the effort, or you're not going to improve unless you, do these things. That can be really demotivating. So especially when the student thinks that they have been putting in a lot of effort, that's going to have a negative backfiring effect. And that's kind of what we're seeing in the K through 12 with this false growth mindset idea. So it really has to be more than just effort messages. It has to be, maybe we should try something different. It doesn't seem to be working for you. Maybe we should seek help on these other ways. Maybe we should use different strategies. And I think that's hard to communicate in a textbook because everything is, not personalized to students. So, but yeah, so we're seeing it kind of more so in the K through 12. I don't think it's been explored much in higher ed.
There's someone who commented in the chat that there's some really old textbooks that are used over and over and over again because they're, because of the technical level is high and they're good for technical things, but may not necessarily be communicating growth mindset messages in those textbooks.
Yeah, I mean, my response is that I think the professor or the instructor is going to have a lot more effect than any message in a textbook in terms of like a growth mindset message, because they're the one who determines your grade. They're the ones who are setting the culture in that class. They're the ones communicating with you directly, being responsive to you. And so we know that matters a lot. So we've looked at like, do TAs matter? Do instructors matter? TAs matter less because they're not the main culture creator. And so I think that's going to be kind of similar to a textbook, that the professor is going to matter, I think, a little bit more, perhaps a lot more than any message in a textbook.
I will, there's a couple of questions left. I'm just mindful of the time. So if anybody wants to leave, we can. Elizabeth, are you able to stay for a couple more minutes to answer? There were 3 more questions that have not been answered. And I just posted in the chat 2 resources. One is our own growth mindset page in the Teaching and Learning Lab that has actual examples of MIT professors imbuing growth mindset messages or utilizing, structuring their assessments and learning opportunities to be more growth oriented, to incorporate iteration and revision. And I've also posted a link to a more recent initiative called Flipping Failure, where it's an initiative by MIT students, graduate and undergrad, telling about their stories of resilience during academic challenge to sort of normalize the experience of challenge at MIT. So I just wanted to point that out. And so the couple of questions that are left, for study 2, was there any difference between female and male faculty instructors with a fixed mindset in terms of how they were perceived by female students?
So I believe in that study, the professor was male. So we didn't manipulate the gender of the professor. So you could imagine that women matched on gender with their professor, that would matter differently. We didn't look at that in the experiment. We did, however, look at interactions correlationally in the university-wide study. So we thought, well, maybe underrepresented racial minorities who have a professor who matches their race, the fixed mindset is going to matter less in that context. Now, we didn't have a whole lot of power to look at that in terms of race, but we didn't see any interactions. So it's not the case, or we think it's not the case, that matching on gender or matching on race is going to buffer you against these fixed mindset messages. It's really the fixed mindset message that matters more. But we only have correlational evidence at this point.
Yeah, that would be a really interesting question to investigate more, because we think that representation is a key component for increasing diversity and inclusion, but as you're stating, it's probably not enough. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I mean, I thought about this a little bit because I would really like to do this study experimentally. And I think, you know, I could see it going both ways. I could see the fixed mindset actually being even more, even worse when it's someone who is part of your group where you feel it's more of a safe environment. And then that threatening message comes from that person. I could see how that could be even more threatening. But, you know, it's an open question. So.
Okay, we're almost there. What are some, do growth mindset professors tend to have more equitable evaluation strategies in their classes?
Yes. So at least correlationally, or at least, I don't know if we have like the greatest data to say this, but yes, so it's the case that they would offer opportunities in a way that is consistent across students. So a lot of times what happens is we see students asking for things like extensions, asking for revisions, or can I do this over again for whatever. And when you rely on students to come to you to ask for those things, that's when you see inequities. And so what we're finding is that the growth-minded professors are automatically putting that in their syllabus or in their course structure. So by being really explicit about it, by being transparent about it, it's not that the policy necessarily differs, it's that you're just being really transparent about it. And that's when everybody knows that that can occur. Everybody knows that that policy is in place. And so you see less inequitable outcomes in that way.
Okay. In a discussion with learners or in the written reflections, how do you distinguish between what is mindset talking? I guess that would be growth mindset, I'm not sure. Or what is self-efficacy? Because it mentions self-efficacy here. Yes.
So self-efficacy is about how good you are in that moment, or what your perceptions are about your successfulness or your efficacy in that moment. So I think I'm good at math, or I think I am not good at, you know, whatever else it is. So it's people's perceptions of their current ability. Whereas a growth mindset is more looking forward, or looking in terms of whether or not that current ability can change or not. So can it improve? Can it decline, for instance? Or is it going to stay the same? And so those two concepts should be parallel, or should be not parallel, they should be perpendicular across, right? We should see that what you believe right now is going to be crossed with what your mindset is.
Great. I think those are all the questions. So everybody's saying thank you in the chat, Elizabeth.
Oh yeah, I should go look at the chat. Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk with you all.